It's certainly been one of the most unprecedented times in human history. The entertainment industry, as well as the global economy, has screeched to a halt. Tensions have only increased, whether it's from the government or our own institutionalized conflicts, and cases for probably the biggest pandemic since 1918 only continues to rise as the days pass by. In these dark times, I find myself drawn to the media that I can wrap myself into like a warm blanket, seeking the entertainment that makes me long for a simpler time, a more nostalgic time. In particular, I find myself being drawn to the themes presented in In 2011, Ernest Cline's first published novel swept through the cultural zeitgeist like no other. Before Stranger Things was even a thought, before the Guardians of the Galaxy blasted off into theaters, Cline's prose evoked the nostalgia of decades prior.
Welcome back. If you're a fan of 80s pop culture, you might want to check out the new book from our next guest. It is called Ready Player One.
While the book was flawed, the premise was exciting and begged to be brought to life. Now, some stories and worlds created in fiction feel restricted when it comes to the medium in which they're being told, and Cline's novel could only scratch the surface of how to visualize this pop culture cornucopia. So when agents pitched Spielberg the book and tried to see if he'd adapt the novel into film, the filmmaker said, "Yes, sir, the book is on my desk." I'm not saying that I think Spielberg was thinking with dollar signs in his eyes, because I do know that he's a pretty legendary filmmaker, and a man would have to be some kind of fool to think he didn't see something worth telling in this. After all, this is the same man that adapted Peter Benchley's rather bleak novel about sharks into a suspenseful and thrilling summer blockbuster. The same man that saw a story of beauty in the middle of one of the most traumatic events in human history in Schindler's List. The same man that saw the potentials of both a remake of War of the Worlds and a Philip K. Dick short story as a chance to reshape blockbusters and provide social commentary in the wake of a post-9/11 world. You don't just give the most iconic filmmaker in the history of Hollywood the reins to, for better or worse, probably the most iconic literary work of the 2010s and expect him to take it at face value. And surely, Spielberg wouldn't dip his feet back into the summer blockbuster pool unless he had something to say. After all, the man has pretty much influenced generations of filmmakers, shaped the course of cinema for nearly 4 decades, and has so many iconic action films under his belt, it's not even funny. And yet, the few times he's attempted a return in recent years to the genre he pretty much invented, he's been met with less than stellar results either critically or commercially. Even when he was given the opportunity to direct it, initially he jokingly replied that
they're going to need a younger director.
Spielberg's reign as the blockbuster king was dethroned, and in a time where the Marvel Cinematic Universe and films that call back to a time of bare-knuckle combat and acrobatics in vain to the over-the-top action movies of the day dominate the megaplexes, what would draw him into a story that is action spectacle of the highest order, especially one that seems particularly drawn so romantically to the past? A mindset that he himself has said is not healthy as an artist. Well, the only logical reasoning, I gather, is he saw an opportunity to do a grand character study not of Wade Watts or Samantha Cook or even the other characters in the story, but rather through the genius behind the OASIS, James Halliday. Working closely with Ernest Cline and screenwriter Zak Penn on how to shape the story up as a feature film, it seems the one character Spielberg connected with on an emotional level was the man whom the hunt revolved around, and a large part of that is seen through how they reshaped the hunt for Halliday's Easter egg. And seeing how Spielberg is getting up there in years, it's easy to see why. To understand what the film does differently, first, you need to see what came before. That is, how Cline initially depicts Halliday, from his personal life to his relationships and the challenges he creates in the hunt. In the novel, Halliday is a man who lived and breathed the media he consumed as a way to escape his abusive father and his bipolar mother, and is apparently considered to be diagnosed with Asperger's or, as written by Cline himself, some other form of high-functioning autism. He snapped at others, especially when people wouldn't share his love of pop culture, and regularly fired employees for not getting his references. As time went on, Halliday ended up severing his friendship with Ogden Morrow, his partner at his game developing studio. While the public thought it was due to a falling out, it was actually because he was madly in love with Karen, also known as Kira, named after the character from The Dark Crystal, who would go on to become Morrow's future wife, and was insanely jealous of the fact that she went with him. Because of that, he retreated further into the development of the OASIS and decided to make an Easter egg hunt reflecting the entertainment he grew up with. The first key was found after beating a demon monster in a game of Joust, then reciting the movie War Games by memory. The second key was found after visiting a planet that had a complete recreation of the text game Zork, and after finding a whistle in a box of Captain Crunch, the player would have to play a first-person perspective game of Black Tiger after taking the Void Conf test in the Tyrell building from Blade Runner. Then, they'd have to go to a sector in the OASIS modeled after Rush songs and find a hidden guitar, play some notes from one of their songs in a tunnel, and hightail it to a planet created by Halliday called Castle Anrak, named after his avatar, and then recite lyrics from Schoolhouse Rock. After playing a game of Tempest and reciting all of Monty Python and the Holy Grail by memory, the player is transported to a trophy room of video game consoles, and they play one final game of adventure on the Atari 2600. Halliday's first console. Then, after activating the secret Easter egg discovery of game developer Warren Robinette's name, instead of seeing it, Halliday's egg appears, and the person wins the game. Now, obviously, this wouldn't translate well cinematically, and this isn't even touching upon most of Wade's journey as a character in the novel, but the lesson that Halliday imparts on him upon winning the game definitely would transition well. The year 2018 houses a wildly different world from the one 2011 encompassed. The Guardians of the Galaxy films were throwbacks to action comedies of the 1980s. Stranger Things brought people back to the wonder of Amblin films. Video games like Hotline Miami and Undertale mimicked the look and feel of Nintendo and Sega consoles, and Greta Van Fleet became popular for plagiarizing Led Zeppelin. Nostalgia was in vogue in the 2010s, and what was once retro was now the norm. People were feeling nostalgic for a simpler time, as were the people in the OASIS, as was James Halliday. And Spielberg understood this. In the book, Halliday's lamentations about the direction his life headed in and his emotional stagnation were only saved for the very last paragraph he's ever mentioned in when Wade wins the contest. In the film, Spielberg, Cline, and Penn made Halliday's lamentations the groundwork for the hunt. Rather than shaping the film around recreations of classic movies and games people love, they decided to shape it around Halliday's biggest decisions made in life, both positive and negative. From the start, the first key is shaped around Halliday's regression. The clue revolves around the day Morrow decided to leave the company they started together after a party. Rather than try and convince him to stay, he falls further and further into the reality he's created and uses it as a crutch. Of course, it's very on the nose for him to say,
"Why can't we go backwards for once? Backwards, really fast as we can. Really put the pedal to the metal, you know?"
But at the same time, the movie plays Staying Alive by the Bee Gees when Wade rather immaturely confesses his love to Artemis right before Act 2 begins, and as he digs himself into an even bigger hole, the lyrics "I'm going nowhere, somebody help me" echo in the background. The movie's not concerned about subtlety, if you haven't noticed. By contrast, this is bookmarked by Wade's inability to see Halliday's regression as exactly that.
I don't want to make any more rules. I'm a dreamer. I build worlds.
Rather than be disappointed by seeing a man turn his back on his friend, he instead looks at it with awe and inspiration, almost romanticizing his egotism and emotional immaturity. It says a lot about where Wade is at the start of the story. The second key's discovery is matched with Wade realizing just how much he's missed out in the real world. Unlike the book, the screenwriters and Spielberg explore the fact that Halliday was madly in love with Karen and shape this section of the hunt after one of his biggest regrets, never being comfortable with human interaction. It fits that this section of the film is shaped around Wade interacting with Artemis's real-world identity of Samantha, beginning to feel more comfortable with people rather than hiding behind an avatar. It also fits that this part of the film both starts and ends with a dance. Samantha dances with Wade solely to get information, and at the Overlook Ballroom, she dances understanding the other side of the coin, by seeing things from Karen's perspective. Not only does Wade learn how this kind of obsession can drive people away, Samantha learns how to open herself up more, at the risk of becoming an even more emotionally and socially stunted person than James and Wade. She takes the plunge that Halliday wasn't able to go through by understanding what real connections mean compared to those made purely through pop culture.
So you found my jade key. Imagine that.
They learn how nostalgia was an anchor to Halliday, not a blessing. Hell, it probably wasn't even enjoyable for him at this point in his life. The third key hits even harder, seeing Wade's and Samantha's growth. It essentially confronts Halliday's genesis as a game designer. Already, Samantha and Wade are going into the third act of the movie in a different place than Halliday was at the third act of his life. They've got friends, they've got support. In Wade's own words,
I know it's kind of a groaner, but I found love.
More than anything though, these characters are forced to start fresh. Samantha is killed by Wade in order to escape IOI, literally saving her from death by the OASIS, albeit more literally. Nolan Sorrento, the antagonist of the film, is killed by his own actions in the OASIS in order to try and stop the characters from progressing for his own benefit. And Wade is killed in the OASIS, forced to start anew with no ties to all his years of baggage in the game. The only difference is Wade is reborn in the OASIS due to him understanding the people around Halliday more than Halliday did himself, as is evidenced with Morrow as the curator secretly giving him an extra life for knowing about how much Karen meant to Morrow, and how much Halliday loved her. Unlike in the way it plays out in the book, where Wade plays a perfect game of Pac-Man and just wins access to an extra life. Having the Easter egg show the game's creator reveals Halliday in his truest form, as according to the book, adventure was the inspiration for him to become a video game designer. As Wade plays the game the way Halliday wanted to, he experiences the beginning of his deterioration, which is perfectly punctuated with a possible AI of Halliday appearing before him, lamenting all the years wasted on nostalgia, and how to grow and learn from it. Or, in his own words,
I created the OASIS because I never felt at home in the real world. I just didn't know how to connect with the people there. I was afraid for all of my life. Right up until the day I knew my life was ending. And that was when I realized that as terrifying and painful as reality can be, it's also the only place that you can get a decent meal. Because reality is real.
Getting to see the older Halliday with a younger version of himself, we get to see the path laid out for him. Wade sees it, and all three of them do know what the dark side is, and in the end, Wade comes to appreciate the connections he's made throughout his journey, and the bonds that are reinforced because of it. Halliday, as a creative, inspired and influenced everyone around him, basically shaping society as a whole. Much in the same way Spielberg shaped cinema, Halliday went to pop culture as a way to escape the horrors of the real world, much in the same way Spielberg escaped to film because of problems in his real life. Halliday shapes his challenges to rewrite his own history, much in the same way Spielberg shapes his films to reflect his mindset at the time. It's no coincidence that for a long period of time, his films depicted broken households or absent father figures, because he lived through that.
And one day my dad just broke down, and I never had seen my dad cry before. And I just stood there in the kitchen, outraged, and my father was not a man. He was crying like a little boy. And I started screaming crybaby at him as loud as I could. Just started screaming crybaby, you crybaby. Until they pushed me out of the kitchen.
As Halliday gets older, he reflects on his life and wants people not to go down the same path he did, only using nostalgia as a substitute for reality. Much in the same way Spielberg matured as a filmmaker and decided to use the power of cinema to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. And through this film, he tries to get that across to the younger generation. Far too often lately, filmmakers and artists try to create a pastiche of what they loved, but don't seem to understand why it resonates so much, and often these blasts from the past ring hollow not just for critics, but audiences alike. Spielberg, for better or worse, has shaped people's nostalgia much in the same way as Halliday shapes society around his nostalgia. Spielberg, Cline, and Penn give us not a cry for change or a call to arms about getting off the damn video games and getting a real job, but a sincere, earnest plea to have one foot in fantasy and the other in reality, recognizing that while it's great to enjoy entertainment, it should never be blinding to the world around us. And more than any other time in the 21st century, people are desperate for an escape. In these uncertain times, the world is going to hell. Disease and civil unrest are only becoming more and more intense as less and less people know what to do to stop the chaos. It's like the hottest day of the year as the temperature only rises more and more until it feels like the smallest thing can make the entire world just snap. It's easy to get hung up on what life was like before. But what is important is that we learn from our past, our mistakes and regrets, and not wallow in it. That's the magic of Ready Player One. Underneath the guise of a great pop culture melting pot, we get a surprisingly well-layered study on the benefits and trappings of nostalgia. Not only that, but it does a good job of reinforcing why we love said nostalgia, while showing how time can alter what we find as nostalgic in different contexts. For Halliday, it's a cry for help. For Wade, it's a cry for acceptance and escape. For Sam, it's a cry for change and understanding. For Sorrento, it's a cry for monetary profit and validation. All of them are essentially right, but all of them are equally wrong. And all of them learn from each other and influence each other's arcs in such a meaningful way that the Spielberg sentimentality that we've all come to know and love makes it so satisfying to watch. And in my mind, all of this elevates what could be negatives in the film as actual positives. I know one big example of people saying this film doesn't understand the properties it's lifting from is the Iron Giant being a huge weapon in the climax of the film, despite in its original story it wanting to be a peaceful, pacifistic robot. But there's actually a reason for this change. It's a perfect metaphor of the great con Spielberg pulls on the audience. Like I mentioned before, people in the film are only obsessed with nostalgia at the surface level, thinking it's cool, assigning an avatar to it, but they don't see what's below the exterior. Like Halliday's challenges, much like his life, much like ours.
Goodbye, Parsival. Thanks. Thanks for playing my game.
hope everyone's doing okay and staying safe out there. I wanted to do a video like this just for my own mental health. It's been very draining watching the news lately, and I wanted to build up my spirits. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Quick shout out to Renegade Pop Culture, which is the website and podcast that I'm a part of. You can find us in the links below in the description. Please give us a follow on Twitter. I hope you guys are staying safe, and I hope you all are doing okay. The next video is going to be a lot more heavy than this, so take care for now. Later.